Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we're going to begin with an invocation. Loving God, we are deeply grateful for this opportunity to gather together around these tables to share a meal and nurture relationships with friends old and new. We ask that you would bless the staff of the BJC who have labored to prepare for this event. May their creative collaboration on behalf of the cause of religious liberty bear much fruit. Bless also those who have labored to grow the food we are about to enjoy, those who have prepared this meal, and especially those who will be serving us today. May the food that we eat and the conversations that we enjoy nurture our bodies, minds, and spirits so that we may be strengthened and energized to do the work you have called us to do, to be advocates for religious liberty for all. Amen. I invite you to now enjoy your salad.
Hello, good morning, everyone. As you enjoy your salad, we are going to take care of some of the preliminary introduction and business part of our lunch today. After that, we are going to break so you can enjoy your meals and enjoy conversation for a nice period of time. I did want to let you know that Jonathan Merritt's books are for sale in the back of the room, and so that time when we're sitting and eating our entrees would be a perfect time if you want to go and look at his books and pick one up. That would be a great time to do that as well. So welcome to the 29th Annual BJC Luncheon. I'm Amanda Tyler, Executive Director of BJC, and we are so excited that you are here today so we can show you our new look and our new way of talking about religious liberty for all. It's my privilege to thank the many people who made today possible. I want to first thank all of our table sponsors for their generosity and for making it possible for others to join us here today. The table sponsors are printed on the back of your program. If you could please join me in thanking them right now. I'd also like to recognize the many students who are joining us today from a number of divinity schools and seminaries from across Baptist life. Engaging the next generation of religious liberty advocates is key to our work at BJC, and we do that in a number of ways, through our BJC internship program, our essay contest, by speaking at colleges and universities around the country, by welcoming groups to our headquarters in Washington, and today by providing free tickets to students to be here with us today. So I'm going to call out the names of the schools represented, and I challenge you to let us know you're in the room. Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. Anybody here? Yeah, great. Baptist Theological Seminary of Richmond is here. Campbell University Divinity School. Central Baptist Theological Seminary. Logsdon Seminary at Hardin-Simmons University. McAfee School of Theology, Mercer University. Gardner-Webb University, School of Divinity. George W. Truett Theological Seminary at Baylor University. And Wake Forest University, School of Divinity. Well, we are also grateful for the dedicated service of our board members, many of whom are with us today. And I would ask if all current and former board members of BJC would stand to be recognized. Well, one of BJC's many programs to equip and train young advocates for religious liberty is our BJC Fellows program. As of this summer, we will have 50 BJC fellows who have gone through our seminar program in Colonial Williamsburg and who are advocates for religious freedom in their communities and contexts. And our BJC fellows will be at our booth this afternoon from 2:30 to 3:30, so I'd encourage you to come by and meet them. Would all BJC fellows please stand to be recognized now? Well, with more than 80 years of work at defending religious freedom for all, you can imagine that BJC has a large alumni network. And so I would ask all people here who have served as either an intern or a staff member at BJC at some point in their life to stand so we can see who you are. Yes, Brent Walker, that does include you. Well, these are wonderful people who serve as BJC alumni, but I am partial, and I think I lead the most talented staff of religious liberty advocates ever assembled in our current staff. And so I want to recognize our BJC team who are here with us today. Holly Holman, General Counsel and Associate Executive Director. Sherilyn Crow, our Director of Communications, communicating in the back. Charles Watson Jr., our Director of Education. Jennifer Hawks, our Associate General Counsel. And Christine Browder, our Associate Director of Mobilization. Not with us today, but working hard back in our DC office are Alana Ostrin, our Associate Director of Communications, Josiah Masters, our Education and Mobilization Assistant, and Carlton Gay, our Executive Assistant. And I want to say a very special thank you to two people for all of the work that they did to make today's event possible. That's Danielle Tyler, our Development Manager, who's back at the office. And in the back, the woman who makes this magic happen is Taryn Deaton, our Senior Director of Development and Strategy. And finally, I want to honor all of you who support BJC's mission to defend and extend religious freedom for all. We could not do the work that we do without your financial support, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And now I'd like to welcome the co-chair of the Religious Liberty Council, BJC Fellow and Associate Pastor, Elisa Aldape, to the stage so we can elect new leaders.
Good afternoon, folks. I'd like to draw your attention to the inside of your program as we have a bit of business to take care of. This is the funnest part of the day. So, as you know, the Religious Liberty Council is one of BJC's 14 supporting bodies. 13 RLC members serving 3-year terms on the BJC Board of Directors. So it's time to consider this year's nominees and elect new RLC members who will then represent the Religious Liberty Council on the BJC Board. If elected, these members will serve a 3-year term on the board and may be re-elected to serve an additional 3-year term. We also need to elect more officers for the RLC. Officers serve a 1-year term and may be re-elected for 3 consecutive terms. I hope y'all got that down now. You will find the nominating committee's recommendations listed in your program. Recommended are the following individuals to serve as RLC officers for their 3rd 1-year term. Elisa Aldape from Washington, D.C. Thank you. Tamby Swinney, Tennessee. Ashton Wells from Kansas City. Recommended this slate of nominees to serve as RLC members on the BJC board are Anira Cano from Texas, Sophie Hersher from Washington, D.C., Kenton Keller from Texas, Madison McClendon from Illinois, and Nelson Rose from Washington, D.C. Are there any other nominations from the floor at this time? Great. Hearing no other nominations, you see our recommendations here. If you would vote to affirm these recommendations of the nominating committee, please say aye. All those opposed say no. I believe the ayes have it. Congratulations to our new members, and thank you for agreeing to serve.
Religious liberty is under great strain today. The term religious liberty is used in strategic ways to its detriment. BJC is dedicated to religious freedom in the historic Baptist tradition and American tradition that holds up the separation of church and state as an essential way of protecting religious freedom for all.
BJC is the only faith-based organization working on the national level that works solely on protecting religious freedom for all people. BJC is a team of lawyers, ministers, people with Capitol Hill experience, educators, scholars, communication and development professionals, united in our commitment to defending religious freedom for all people. Today, we see a lot of confusion about what the term religious liberty even means. Often, when people are claiming that their religious liberty is being threatened, they're really talking about the fact that someone else's choice or even a law is not in line with their own religious beliefs. That's not necessarily a threat to religious liberty. That's more a concern about the loss of religious privilege. BJC is concerned about the targeting of religious minorities.
We have to work to make sure that individuals are protected in the free exercise of religion and to make sure that government does not unnecessarily interfere in our faith.
That means the government doesn't take sides when it comes to religion. It doesn't favor one religion over another. It leaves religious matters to religious institutions and to individuals.
We want to ensure that all citizens are treated fairly under the law, and that no religion is privileged or preferred under the law, and that no religion is denigrated by the law. BJC advances its mission through our advocacy in legislatures and the courts.
We filed our first brief with the United States Supreme Court in 1947, and we've been involved in almost every church-state case since then.
We're active participants in coalitions involving other religious groups, civil rights groups, education, and government accountability advocates. We train not only our churches in supporting individuals, but we have particular programs to equip young leaders to be advocates for religious freedom as well.
That's why we have a BJC internship program, BJC Fellows.
The Fellows program is designed to educate a new generation of religious liberty advocates. We need your help. Join BJC's advocacy teams, check our website for updates, and find other ways that you can engage in our work and be a religious liberty advocate in your own community.
Join us in this cause. Get in touch with us to find out how you can protect religious liberty. It happened more than 4 months ago, but I remember this moment so clearly. I was sitting on my couch, hanging out with my husband, scrolling through Twitter, thinking about what I was going to do for my birthday the next day. And then I saw this news about Dominique Ray. He was on Alabama's death row, and he had asked to have his imam present at his execution instead of the Christian chaplain that the facility provided. He had converted to Islam in prison, and this was his request for his execution day. The Supreme Court denied that request, and at 10:12 p.m. on February 7th, Dominique Ray was executed by the state of Alabama without his imam present. And there I sat, 3 miles from the United States Supreme Court and 1,000 miles from Atmore, Alabama, and angry tears welled in my eyes. I am sure that you, as lovers and defenders of religious freedom for all, had a similar reaction when you learned this news. Yes, he did heinous things, but he was also a citizen, and the United States Supreme Court denied him religious freedom when he needed it the very most. The fact that 2 months later, some of those same justices decided differently for a different man on death row in Texas who wanted his Buddhist priest at his side for his execution only sowed more confusion and distrust over the disparate outcomes. Today, attacks on religious freedom are coming right and left. Whether it's these death row cases, whether it's the Muslim travel ban, the mass shootings in mosques and temples, the proliferation of Bible classes in public schools, or the alarming rise of Christian nationalism in this country, religious liberty is in the headlines and making breaking news. Sometimes it's the government that's trampling on that line meant to separate church and state. Sometimes it's the courts that are failing to protect the First Amendment. And sometimes it's the people who hurl hate speech, or worse, commit violence against religious minorities. Making things worse, some fundamentalist groups have co-opted the term religious freedom to their own ends, claiming a loss of religious liberty when they are really clinging to their religious privilege as it's being threatened by new diversity. So what a time it is that we have chosen to gather and talk about religious liberty. As the only faith-based group working solely on religious freedom on the national level, BJC's 80 years of leading the national conversation on this issue has prepared us well to take charge of this defining moment. And we've been very busy. We meet with Congress, we file briefs in the United States Supreme Court, we organize advocacy campaigns, and we bring together leading faith and human rights groups to speak out in a way that cannot be ignored. You know, it's interesting. When I travel around the country speaking on these issues, many in the audience already do feel inundated with this news, and they're angry and concerned and asking what they can do to help. But then there are others who come up to me and say, why aren't we hearing more about this? They read the same headlines, but they don't immediately think about these in terms of religious freedom in the First Amendment. So we need to take these conversations into the broader world, to our neighbors, both inside our houses of worship and outside, to our family gatherings, to our workplaces, to our community gathering spots, and to our social media networks. And to do this, we must do it together. We are not interested in talking at people. This is not about tweeting out an edict or starting a soundbite war. We don't claim to have all the answers. We want to lead conversations that are rich with diverse viewpoints. Like any relationship, it's complicated. But simple doesn't do the trick. Simple doesn't find solutions, and simple is part of the problem. To lead these complicated conversations, we know we have to be more clear than ever. And that's why today, here and now, we are introducing this new look for BJC. We hope our new look captures the immediate relevancy of our work, expresses the excitement and passion of BJC in action, and invites more people to join with us. At BJC, we are ready to be agents of change in this digital world with its ever-evolving nonstop news cycle and social media and meme-driven culture. I want you to check out our new front door at bjconline.org. It launched about an hour ago. So the paint is still wet on the set. You're here for opening night. Be patient with it, but check us out on this new website. Over the coming weeks, I hope that you'll spend time there and become part of our working think tank. Our voices will get louder, our reach broader, with new engaging digital content, like a new podcast series, online essays, videos, and animations designed for you to share with your networks. This is breaking all the time. And just yesterday, the Supreme Court handed down its decision on a massive cross on government land in Bladensburg, Maryland. BJC led a coalition effort on a brief joined by other Christian and Jewish groups to make an obvious yet remarkable argument that the cross is a religious symbol. This argument might sound obvious, but it was necessary. Because in their zeal to protect a 40-foot cross on government property that was erected nearly a century ago, the backers of this particular cross, including the U.S. government, argued that the cross is a secular symbol, one that is a generic monument for all war dead. Well, BJC could not stand for that argument. And so we stood up for the cross of Calvary, and we stood with our humanist brothers and sisters in objecting to the government sponsorship. In 80 pages of splintered decisions, the justices also acknowledged that the cross is a Christian symbol, and they refused to accept the extreme argument that the cross is a universal symbol of sacrifice. Yes, the majority let this cross stay up, but they relied mostly on its specific history. I'm sure that you're going to have a chance as you go home and into your communities to talk about this case, and we will all likely have opportunities to combat some of the worst arguments that are trying to prop up Christian nationalism, that dangerous political ideology that tries to merge American and Christian identities. And it will take all of our voices, especially Christian voices, to insist that there are no second-class faiths in this country, and that attempts by the government to prop up Christianity will harm it beyond recognition if we allow it. We're preparing to lead an ecumenical campaign to help lift these voices, and we'll launch that effort later this summer. We're also building a trained and equipped BJC advocacy team of individuals like you, poised to take action with their members of Congress and other elected officials, as well as to lead conversations like these in their communities. And this fall, we'll be on the road with a series of advocacy trainings, introducing new resources to make it easier for you to connect with your members of Congress to express your support for faith freedom for all. So my question to you today is, do you want to be part of this cause of faith freedom for all? Today is your opportunity to join us. BJC is positioned to make a difference at this critical time because of the long-time generous support of freedom fighters in this room and around this country. Perhaps you've supported our mission for years, but you've never given before, or it's been a while since your last gift. Maybe you're ready to increase your investment in faith freedom for all, or you want to make a special gift to show you are with us as we endeavor to expand our circle and bring more advocates into our fold. As we launch BJC's new look and new website today, we are also asking you to partner with us financially in a new way. We've set a goal to raise $500,000 in support from individuals this year to help make all these plans possible. And I'm thrilled to announce that to help us get off to a great start, a generous donor will match the first $50,000 received, dollar for dollar, between today and July 31st. And so I would ask, yes, thank you. So I would ask that you take out your phone and go to this URL that's on your screen right here, tiny.cc/BJC Luncheon, to make a gift now. We also have envelopes on the tables here, and you can fill those out and give them to a person in a BJC t-shirt who was here in the back with baskets for you as well. We could not be happier that you are with us today as we take this exciting step into BJC's future. And to thank you for being here in Birmingham on launch day, we have our new t-shirts available as our gift to you for being our partners in this work. After our program is complete, please make your way to these tables on the side of the wall and find your size. I hope that you'll wear your shirts as you make your way home this weekend. Tell someone about why you support faith freedom for all. Also, take the new brochure that you have on your tables. Share it with your airplane seatmate who asks you what you were doing in Birmingham, or the colleague who asks you where you were last week. Lead the conversation with the help of these new tools and new strategies to talk about religious liberty. Thank you for joining us on the journey that has gotten us to this point. Thank you for being here today, And more importantly, thank you for being with us on this road ahead. While threats to religious liberty are all around us now, we know that we, together, are up for this challenge. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to see all of you. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jonathan Merritt. I know many of you know him through his work, and some of you may be personal friends with him. We're all in for a treat today. Jonathan is an accomplished and prolific faith and culture writer. We need those. He's an author of many books, most recently of Learning to Speak God from Scratch. The books are on sale in the back corner there, so make sure you get one. His background will be familiar to many of you. As a Baptist, he was steeped in church and scripture, which eventually led him to think more seriously and even pursue his studies in divinity and theology with 2 graduate degrees. His writing indicates that he continues to be a very serious and hardworking student of faith with the desire to engage others by being thoughtful, courageous, and provocative. So we've been warned. But that's not all. In his podcast series, Seekers and Speakers, I listened to recently and found that he provides what I would call healing therapy for turbulent times. He asks us to reimagine sacred words, and in conversations we have, to think about them, to bring our own experiences to them. And I found that that gives us an opportunity to recognize and participate in God's creation in new and exciting ways. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Merritt.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here, not for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I feel like this is sort of my tribe. Thank you. Gosh, we were already starting with applause. You guys are a great crowd. I went to Baptist seminary and then went on to a United Methodist seminary. And when I was at Emory at Candler School of Theology, I remember asking my dad, I said, it's so weird being around all these Methodists because I grew up, only hanging out with Baptists. And I said, Dad, if we hadn't been Baptist growing up, what would we have been? And he said, we would have been ashamed. So it is a joy to be with you. Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. It's a popular quote among Christians these days, and it's often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. There's obviously one big problem with it. Francis never said it. In fact, Francis was quite a preacher himself. Mark Galli, who is the editor of Christianity Today and a biographer of St. Francis, notes that the founder of the Franciscan order would preach in up to 5 villages a day, often outdoors. In the country, Francis often spoke from a bale of straw or standing in a doorway. In a town, he would climb on a box or up steps in a public building. Galli continues by saying, and I'm quoting, his words were neither hollow nor ridiculous, but filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, penetrating the marrow of the heart, so that listeners were turned to great amazement. So Francis never made such a statement. Francis would have never made such a statement, and nobody knows who actually did make that statement. But whoever did, it has to be one of the worst quotes of all time. The Christian faith is made credible by acts of love and acts of compassion and acts of justice. But the Christian faith would not exist. It could not exist without words. I mean, this is the way that religion, all religions, including ours, produces progeny. Most of you, I'm assuming, are part of the Christian tradition, and if you are, have you ever wondered why that is? Have you ever wondered how that became so? It is because someone spoke to someone who spoke to someone who spoke to someone who spoke to you. This transmission of words rippled across time and space like an intergenerational game of telephone until someone in that chain spoke to you. The Christian faith was designed to replicate itself, in part, through the act of what I call speaking God. You see, St. Francis knew what many of his modern admirers seem to have forgotten, which is that language is central to who we are as humans. It's critical to our calling as Christians. We are called to lead the conversation. Now, frankly, this shouldn't be a surprising idea for those of us who grew up in churches and grew up reading the Christian scriptures. The centrality of words is woven deep into the fabric of our sacred text, beginning in the poetry of the first chapter of Genesis. You'll remember that text, in which God creates world with words. God uses language to form seaweed and roses, caterpillars and cats, riptides and supernovas. But God doesn't stop there. With a whisper, divine breath inflates lungs. Now, at this point, so the story goes, the Creator gives humans a gift. And those of you who have been to seminary know that theologians have a fancy word for this, the imago Dei, image of God. Each of us, male and female, black, brown and white, citizen and immigrant, Republican and Democrat, capitalist and socialist, gay and straight, cisgender and transgender, all of us at any time, we bear within us the image of our Creator. But what is that image? What is that imago Dei in us? Well, theologians have debated this for a long, long time, and we're certainly not going to resolve that question here. Some say it's intellect. Others say it's the ability to reason or to obey a moral code. But I think another answer that's at least as plausible given the context of this reference in Genesis is that the image of God within us is the ability to communicate, the ability to speak. One Episcopal writer has said, God could have made us stone creatures or tree creatures or sea creatures or winged creatures, but God made us speech creatures instead. Human beings created in God's own likeness, which is to say, capable of joining God in the work of creation by speaking things into being ourselves. Now, your words will not cause plants to sprout, but they can make hope spring forth in a human heart. They can change the direction that our society will go and grow. The words you choose to use can cause a smile to take shape on a sullen face. They can shake listeners awake, force heads to snap sideways, woo a lover into making a lifelong commitment to share life with you. You see, God birthed us with words, and now we find ourselves walking this earth in constant labor pains, giving birth ourselves to worlds with the power of our words. Speaking is central to the experience of existence, but speaking is not just a natural act. Speaking should also be a supernatural act. It's not just a human action, but it can be a holy action. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthian church, the apostle writes these words, "As it is written, I believe, therefore I have spoken. And since we have that same spirit of faith, we also believe, and therefore we speak." That those of us who believe have an obligation to speak about the implications of what we believe, especially in a time like this. Of course, Paul was not the first person to connect spirituality and speech, not by a long shot. Though Genesis sort of sets the stage for this concept of speaking God, the rest of the Old Testament develops it further. When Moses descended Mount Sinai lugging those 2 stone tablets, He was delivering 10 phrases that would become Israel's watchwords. Those commandments make for a curious list if you ever stop to read them. One addresses the need for rest. Another forbids cheating on your spouse. Stealing is out in one commandment. Another vetoes covetousness, idol-making, off-limits, children honored to order their parents. But when it comes to words, have you ever considered that God decided to issue not one but two commands? God doubles up. One prohibits bearing false witness against another person, which is just a fancy way of saying that hate speech, slander, and lying are all bad news. Another commandment forbids people from taking God's name in vain. The lesson that words are too powerful to use without care, especially when we're speaking God. Years after Moses chiseled this Decalogue, words continued to play a prominent role in the Jewish tradition, God speakers passing stories and laws from generation to generation long before the invention of pens, parchment, or even papyrus. Ancient Israel was, in the phrasing of theologian Walter Brueggemann, primarily a community of utterance. Prophets deemed faithful or condemned by the words they spoke or withheld, from the weeping Jeremiah to the dreaming Isaiah, who once envisioned the angel of God cleansing his lips with a hot coal so that he could speak sacred words well. And who can forget Elijah? One of the most fascinating stories in the entire Hebrew Bible, we find this weary prophet climbing Mount Horeb to meet Israel's God. Stand on the mountain in front of me, God says, and so the prophet does. And then the story says that a mighty wind swept across the mountain and tore the rocks apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. And then a rumbling earthquake shook the foundations of that mountain, but the Lord was not in the quake. Then a fire descends on the mountain, sweeping across its face, but God was not in the fire. And when all of that settles down, God in this story comes in a gentle whisper. In words, God came, which is the way God often comes to us all. Now, when the Christian tradition arises, it inherits these ideas from its older Jewish sibling and draws them forward. Jesus would be called by John the Word of God, grows into a man before launching his ministry in his hometown synagogue, standing in Nazareth. He announces to those listening that he has been anointed by God to proclaim, which is to say, to speak God. And the last 3 years of Jesus' life and ministry were first and foremost a ministry of words. He would say, "Come, follow me." He would say, "Your faith has healed you." He would say, "Go and sin no more. Blessed are the peacemakers." And with every proclamation, doors swung wide, lame legs danced, and cataracts dissolved into the atmosphere. In fact, Jesus loved language so much you could often find Jesus talking about words with words. He says, good people should spew life-giving language that will have to justify the way that we spoke in the afterlife, that human beings can't live by bread alone, but by nourishment from divine syllables. Well, it's no wonder then that the last command Jesus gives his disciples is to go, therefore, into all the world and speak God. Well, the words keep coming even after our Lord was executed. Most astoundingly, on the day of Pentecost, the story of Pentecost should not be understood in isolation. Actually, this story is a mirror opposite, a divine reversal, if you will, of another canonical tale, which we find in Genesis 11. In that story, all the people speak a single language, and they come together to build a tower to reach God. It's a symbol of their pride, their desire to dominate the earth, to reign supreme. It says they built the tower so that they could make a name for themselves. And in response, God causes them to speak different languages so that no one would understand each other. They're forced to disband into tribes that would war against each other. Fast forward, Pentecost. People come together from a range of places, different tribes and different tongues, not able to understand each other, huddled together in a room that felt like a funeral parlor. This band of distraught disciples sat in a cloud of defeat. They discussed what to do next as if anyone knew. And then it happened. a wind swept through that room, and when they breathed it into their lungs, they breathed out words they did not know they knew. Fires like struck flint above their heads, strange words swirling throughout every corner of the neighborhood with such intensity that a crowd rushes to investigate. If you consider these stories together, you realize that the linguistic component in these tales is not incidental, it is instructive. And what is the lesson? Well, it's a lesson we're seeing now all across our country. When sin reigns, language divides. But when the Spirit reigns, language unites. That party eventually died down, but their talking did not cease. These followers of Jesus traversed to every corner of the globe, nattering on about the Jesus way. In some places, people grew annoyed or even angry at their chatter, but this would not stop them. Whenever they were instructed to sit down and shut up, they replied without hesitation, "We cannot keep from speaking about what we have seen and heard." They kept speaking and speaking and speaking, leading the conversation, passing on their love for sacred words to every generation that followed, and then, well, to you, to preachers of the gospel, that newest link in that ancient chain committed to trying to find a way to use your words to make a difference. Consider for a moment that every major transformative moment in biblical history, the creation, the Tower of Babel, the calling of Abraham and of Moses, the giving of the Mosaic Law, every prophetic revelation and proclamation, the arrival and ministry of Jesus, the Great Commission, the day of Pentecost. God could have ushered in each of these moments in an infinite number of ways, but God always uses a linguistic miracle. God uses words. So when Paul comes to us in 2 Corinthians 4, we can understand why Paul speaks to us so matter-of-factly, drawing on this rich history, knitting together spirituality and speech. We believe, therefore we speak. But in a world like ours, that's easier said than done, isn't it? We often struggle to have spiritual or religious conversations with our friends and family members, co-workers, and neighbors. 5 years ago, I realized just how difficult this was when I relocated from the Bible Belt to New York City. Prior to this move, I lived outside of Atlanta, where almost all my friends were Christian. Most of us went to the same church. And in this world, there was kind of a cultural Christian lingo that most everybody speaks and pretty much everybody else understands, right? If somebody sneezes, somebody might say, "God bless you." But the sneezer doesn't stop and say, "What do you mean by God or bless?" If somebody mentioned that they had been, quote, born again, or they attended a Bible-believing church, we all kind of knew what they were signaling, what they were saying. No follow-up question was needed. We would often, meeting a stranger, ask where they went to church rather than if they did. So in this context, I used religious language with ease, rarely pausing to think about what my words meant. I never stopped to ask the question that most of us never stop to ask, which is, what am I saying when I'm saying what I'm saying? I realized upon moving to New York, I'd been writing about faith and culture for years, but as it turns out, pontificating about a post-Christian society is far easier than living in one. In New York, religious fluency is not assumed. The majority of residents do not attend church on any given Sunday, and as I quickly discovered, many people don't understand the sacred words that I had taken for granted. Others use them with wildly different meanings. Not long after my move, I caught on to a pattern emerging in my conversations. Exchanges flowed freely when I stuck to benign topics like the dreaded winter weather or the maddening sound of jackhammers on the street, but the moment the subject turned spiritual, the conversation stalled. To avoid having to define every sacred term or make sure it didn't trigger the other person, I just swept them into a pile and out the door. And as it turns out, I'm not alone, because I've been meeting people from all over with similar histories of belief who also feel this tension. Terms like sin and hell have become so negative that they lodge in our throats. Others, like belief and salvation, well, we've uttered those so often we don't even know what they mean anymore. Definitions and connotations of words like mercy and love, well, and even phrases like religious liberty can no longer be assumed. In fact, that phrase, religious liberty, which has historically meant freedom for all people of all faiths to worship the God they choose and live life according to the moral tenets of their faith, has sort of changed in recent years in the United States. In the hands of some people today, that phrase connotes privileges given mostly to Christians and specifically to the white conservative kind who form a very critical part of the Republican base. Instead of what George Marsden called inclusive pluralism, that phrase now stands for the primacy of conservative Christianity, for shame. With so much confusion about so many religious and moral words and phrases, no wonder people are purging them from their vocabulary. After my experience moving to New York, I conducted a national survey of more than 1,000 Americans, and you know what I found? I found that millions of us, actually more than 2/3 of us, are not speaking God often. More than 1/5 of Americans admit they haven't had a spiritual conversation at all in the last year. Only 7% of Americans say that they talk about spiritual matters regularly, which is about once a week. It's just sort of surprising when you think about it. More than 70% of America claiming to be Christian, only 7% saying they actually talk about these things. And here's the real kicker. When it comes to practicing Christians who attend church regularly, only 13% say that they've had a spiritual conversation in the last week. It means if you look around your tables, and if all of you are faithful Christians, only about 1 in 8 of you will have a spiritual conversation in any given week. So millions of Americans now struggle to find sacred language to adequately describe life's deeper truths. We believe, but we do not therefore speak. We've lost our therefore. And why are so many of us tongue-tied? Well, according to my poll, there are a range of reasons. More than a quarter of people say that religious conversations always seem to create tension or arguments. Of course, if you've ever found yourself around the Thanksgiving table and Uncle Philip is shaking a turkey drumstick at you, trying to lecture the family on what the Bible really says, you can understand why they might avoid these types of conversations. Many of us have enough tension in our lives without fighting over religion, so we avoid the topic. About 20% of people say they've been turned off by the way that politicians have used their words for partisan purposes. Of course, this is an American tradition, not just affecting the right, though they are often sometimes the worst offenders. In addition to each of these reasons, people gave a range of other explanations for why they chose not to speak God. Some said they're embarrassed by the way these words are used in popular culture. Some say they don't want to seem like a religious extremist. Some say that they've been hurt by religious words in the past, that their parents or their pastors or their friends used religious language as weapons to oppress or repress, shame or scold them. One of the reasons I think so many people want to preach the gospel without words is because they no longer can seem to find the right words to express their beliefs and hopes and experiences. And so for many of us, and for many reasons, religious and spiritual language has become toxic. We don't want to lead the conversation, but we need to. I've had so many people who've said to me something like this. They say, what does it matter? Just let all of this God talk go. It doesn't matter if we use moral or religious language. It doesn't matter if we speak God. Talk is cheap anyway, right? Let's just focus on doing instead of saying, which is an odd thing to hear when a big portion of your job is to preach, to speak, to say something. But you know, this is a false dualism that I think is quite popular today. It divides speaking from doing, and I think it's about time that we're honest about just how untrue it actually is. People, when they say to me that words are cheap, or they tell me don't do something, say something, I think this is a partial truth, but it's not the whole truth, so help me God. It's correct that our words should be accompanied by corresponding deeds. But can't we also acknowledge that in this current moment, to say something is to do something, because words have the power to change things. In the 1960s, British philosopher of language J.L. Austin developed his speech act theory, in which he explains that when a speaker stands before a hearer and admits an acoustic blast, remarkable things occur. He actually said that there are 3 acts involved whenever you open your mouth and speak. Locution, which is the actual words a person will use. Illocution, the meaning of your words. And then perlocution, the effect, the result, the action, the impact of your speaking, the thing your speaking does. 20th century French philosopher Hélène Cixous remarked, "It is said that life and death are under the power of language." Well, it sounds a lot like something an ancient Hebrew king said. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. A thoughtless word, that wise monarch said, is like the fatal thrust of a sword, while a phrase wrapped in love is medicine. When you leave this place, when you go out and you speak words about justice and equality and mercy and compassion, you are doing something. You're encouraging or discouraging, directing or redirecting, harming or healing. And if you think about it for a moment, if you think about your own life, you'll realize how true this is. Every person in this room, I would guess, would tell you that their life's path has been altered by words spoken over them, about them, to them. I love you, spoken by the right person at the right moment, will set your heart ablaze. I'm leaving you, particularly when it's spoken by those same lips, well, that can incinerate you into an ash pile. A teacher's decision to say, yes, you can, as opposed to you'll never succeed, can determine whether a student grows into a sculptor or a scientist. A simple, I'm sorry, can mend what's broken. Perhaps no one in the Jewish tradition knew more about linguistic power than did Solomon's father, David. When he was a boy and still smelled of musty lamb's wool, a prophet spoke words over him about his destiny as a king. When a giant threatened his nation, he spoke defiant words in defense of his people, and then he slayed that giant with stones from a shepherd's bag. Well, you know how the story goes. Eventually, David gave up herding sheep for ruling a nation, but then he slung a different kind of stone. Through his psalms, David flung limestone verbs and sandstone nouns and conjunctions made of dolomite. He leveraged words to vent and lament, bless and praise, and those stony psalms skipped across time and generations of Jews as they were recited, sung, and prayed. Hundreds of years after David's body was laid to rest, his words still prove powerful enough to slay giants. The giants of depression, discouragement, bitterness, and loss. Millions of God seekers and God speakers across generations have read these psalms in a time of need and found that they didn't just speak, they changed something in their lives. You see, if we let sacred speech die, we abandon one of the greatest tools we possess for personal and social transformation, and we forfeit the ability to define what these sacred words will mean for us in our day, because words are defined by how they are used. So we need you to speak, God. We need you to lead the conversation, especially in this moment in American history, because when people like us stay silent, all the other people, the people who are causing the problem, well, they get to hog the microphone. That toothy televangelist will keep using spiritual language to call for donations to buy yet another private jet. And there will be no one to say, no, actually, faith is not about serving your own desires, but advocating for the least of these. No, they'll dominate the conversation because, well, we've all stopped speaking God. That politician will continue to use spiritual language to push xenophobic and homophobic legislation. And there will be no one to say, actually, faith calls us to welcome the stranger, to promote justice and equality. No, they'll dominate the conversation because we've all stopped speaking God. That street preacher will keep using spiritual language to peddle the fear of a fiery hell and spew condemnation at passersby, and there will be no one to say, no, God loves you because God loves you, because God loves you. because God loves you, because that's just who God is and that's just what God does, and there is no condemnation for you. No, they will dominate the conversation because, well, we've all stopped speaking God. You see, many of us, we have gotten so sick over the way that religious language has been used, misused, abused, but in our effort to avoid contributing to the problem, we've actually made it worse. And so I would encourage you today, the world needs you to speak God. The world needs you to lead the conversation, especially in this moment. Speaking of famous quotes, I like this one, which is rightly attributed to Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men, good women, to do nothing. I would add that evil often triumphs, and we're seeing it now in the United States, because good people say nothing. Because good people like you do not speak up. They do not speak out. And so that's my prayer for you, that you would change that. I think it would make a difference. I think it can make a difference. I think it needs to make a difference. And so with that, I bless every one of you with this benediction. May you be passionate, vulnerable, courageous God speakers. In this age of discrimination, may you preach the gospel of justice. In this age of violence, may you preach the gospel of peace. In this age of division, may you preach the gospel of reconciliation. In this age of hate, may you preach the gospel of love, and because it is necessary, may you use your words. Thank you.